Hello and welcome to another episode of the Secret Teachings Radio. This is our Friday pre-show. I see that we have a lot of listeners in the chat already. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday evening, my Saturday morning. As you can see, we have an interesting show planned, a wheel of the Octagram. We'll be discussing the 8-spoked wheel of the year and the symbolism of that wheel as it applies to various cultures around the world. For those of you who are new to the Secret Teachings, as I said, we'll begin the show here in just a few minutes. This is a very short pre-show, a very short listener comment section of the show. There may be new listeners who find this later or new listeners in the chat now. And for new listeners specifically, if you're an old listener, don't worry about this. Tune out for a second. But for all of our new listeners, TST Radio, The Secret Teachings, has been on air for 15 years. And this show is airing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. You hear and you see the Friday show because other listeners, the longtime listeners, and some more recent listeners, subscribe to our archive. They buy copies of books or they listen to the free show archive. So very briefly before we start, I want to show the free show archive where you can listen to all of our past episodes of the show, because I've been hearing from listeners on YouTube and other places that they wish we do more shows. YouTube isn't the only place where shows are posted. You can find us, you go to our website, click on the archive link, and you'll find the full archive that just goes on and on and on and on and on. Back 15 years, there's different ways to listen to the show. This is the main show archive that you're seeing on your screen. And it has a new show promo for every night, has a new show title, and a show description as well. So if you are new to the Secret Teachings, I recommend that you go and find our archive online for free. And if you enjoy it and you want to get rid of ads, you can subscribe to the ad-free show there as well on the website. We have different tiers and you get different perks with each tier. We also have just the main archive through Spreaker, and you can just type in TST Radio Spreaker, Spreaker, and find the show that way. You see, we've done a number of Halloween-themed shows this week: Celtic Christianity, Having Your Soul Cake and Eating It Too, and our Halloween divination with Ancient Intelligence last night. So this is for new listeners. If you're new, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of the Secret Teachings, named after a very famous book by Manly P. Hall. Alrighty, so now that we've taken care of that, let's take a look at the chat room. Let's see who was tonight here first in the chat room. It looks like Leonard was here first. Hello, Leonard. Thank you for joining us tonight. Bikuna was always here, or was here. I think these guys are always here. I think Noka and Bad Whiskey are always here. We have a lot of regulars in the chat room tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Aloha, Noka. Awesome job on shows this week. Well, thank you very much. Put a lot of effort into the shows this week. Done a lot of extracurricular reading as well to prepare for those shows. And tonight it wasn't so much reading, it was more so trying to find images that would be applicable to tonight's show. I had to find original, not edited or not cartoonish versions of some of these 8-pointed stars, which are universal around the world, and what they mean. I'm trying to find the as you could say, the official kind of version of whatever the octagram was in whatever culture. It took a little bit of time, but we are prepared and ready for the show tonight. We also have Marilyn here from Florida. Don't get that rumor started that I'm a Grandmaster Mason, because then people already think I'm a Mason for some reason. I put my hand in my pocket for a photo shoot with my wife, and people think that's a Masonic gesture. I didn't realize reaching in your pocket for change makes you a Mason, and I didn't realize that that makes you evil. But don't get that rumor started that I'm a Grandmaster. I'm an entered apprentice. Edward Preston is here. Hello, Edward. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tim is here. I saw Tim on YouTube the other day. Tim was getting in on that Corey Good bankruptcy action. That's some good stuff. Corey Good's declared bankruptcy, I think a second time, conveniently right when Guy was trying to grab some of his wages, so he just doesn't have any money. Zeros across the board. Joe Ryder is here. Thank you, Joe, for joining us. Kay Owens is here. Hello, Kay. We also have in the chat Misto Stokos, who said that they shared the Celtic Christianity show with their mother and haven't heard back from them. I think maybe he was joking a little bit. I don't know. Were you joking? Did you actually share that with your mom? I assume you're kind of joking. But yeah, that show will really get people ticked off, even though we're just reading kind of, I don't know, very simple. It's not even like a matter of it being mainstream or alternative, or it's not controversial. It's weird. Like, yeah, the Druids worshipped the sun and they had a savior and an omnipotent God, and they had crosses and exorcisms and purgatory, heaven and hell, and they also had the Trinity, and they also had the Madonna and Child. And for some reason, that really pisses off a group of people, probably because it happened about 1,500 years before Christ. That's probably the main reason. Let's see what else we have in the chat. And as I scroll through this, I should note about the Druids, for the record, once again, that it's actually kind of proof that Christians are right. It's just that they take things a little bit too literally, I think, is the problem. Learning about the Druids or Zoroastrianism might teach you that your religion is correct. It's just a matter of how you choose to interpret the meaning of the symbols. Reno is here. Reno said, "Too bad you don't partake, Ryan, because Bible pages make good rolling papers." Well, see, I don't go that far because I don't roll anything. And I also have, I used to have several different Bibles, but when I moved, I kept my Knights Templar Bible. It's a really cool Bible. So I hold the Bible to be sacred, not the Schofield Bible, but I do hold the Bible to be sacred. I also hold the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita and the Zend-Avesta and various other religious texts. What else do we have in the chat room tonight? Shaking the Hidden Hand, the school resource office. Oh, I thought they were talking about the show. Thank you for joining us, Shaking the Hidden Hand. And for those of you just tuning in, this is not the actual show. This is just the pre-show. We'll note a couple of listeners in the chat. We'll get things started, and then we will play the intro for the show. Patrick Hartman is here. Hello, Patrick. Thank you for joining us on the show tonight. Evan Kelly is here. Waiting with anticipation. I'm actually waiting with anticipation too. I'm very excited to do this show. Don't actually have a lot of subject matter, but we have a lot of interpretation of the subject matter that we do have for tonight's show about the octagram, the 8-pointed star or wheel. Patriot Girl is here. Hello, Patriot Girl. And I'm scrolling through this very slowly, trying not to miss anybody. Oh, Flux is here. Hello, Flux. I think, Flux, you're a little bit late tonight. Usually you're here earlier. Rita is here. Hello, Rita. Rita's here early as well. Nice to see you. We also have in the chat room, I think I saw some other people. Yep. Brad Pitbull is here. Hello, Brad. Jeffrey Phillips is here. Hello, Jeffrey. Antonio is here from Old Dirty Mexico. Yes, old Coca-Cola controlled, cartel controlled Mexico. The Coca-Cola company is a cartel down there, I think. Wonder if they've killed more people than the actual drug cartels. That'd be an interesting statistic to look at, or at least poison the lives of more people. Antonio says they are all good ancient documents to research humanity. I agree with you. I think that's accurate. Best time of the year for the occult, eh? Yes, it is one of the best times of the year for the occult. I think even though springtime and summertime, all of the different spokes of the wheel are important, this time feels different because the season is going from the comfort of warmth to unless you like the cold, to an uncomfortable time of cold and snow and sleet and ice and darkness, and that's just kind of miserable. So we look to the other side. We look to other things that we normally wouldn't look to for comfort in this time. Emily is here. Hello, Emily. Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight in the chat as well. Brandon Kramer just joined us too. Yes, and I have had that song, "Wheel in the Sky." I've had that song playing in my head as well. When I was doing the show last night, or preparing for the show last night rather, I had that song stuck in my head too. All night. Shaking the hidden hand said the Four Horsemen. You're right, the Four Horsemen. So you might hear tonight, if you're an old listener, you've heard the show before, you might hear some references to the four horses that you've heard before. I'm a very compulsive and very repetitive person, so I think it's necessary and important to recap certain important stories and details on if we're doing a series on every show, because we have new listeners that tune into a specific episode, and if you don't have that context, then they might have, a harder time understanding what the show's about. Because this is not a standard kind of a radio show, at least in terms of the things that we say. I don't have talking points. I'm not trying to convince you that a religion that I have or practice or believe in is better. I'm not really interested in doing that with politics or anything for that matter, which is, of course, what makes this show unique, but it's also what makes this show very, very isolated. Some people want to be our friends and talk to us, but we're definitely blackballed in a lot of places because of that. Noka says Taoism is the religion of the octagon. Very interesting diving into Taoism. Yep. And Taoism is actually the one of the bases of Shintoism. It all sort of comes from the same place. Taoism really comes out of India, I think. KO and said, I love how Ryan covers so many religions and shows the similarities. I often research things I wouldn't otherwise after listening. Well, that's the point of the show. I'm so glad that you do that. And there's a lot of 8-pointed stars you'll have to research tonight. I'll also preface by saying that I will do my best to pronounce the various different stars because they're in, at least a half a dozen languages that I've tried to find pronunciation guides, and maybe I'm going to pronounce them right. I'm not really sure. There's indigenous names, and then there's Arabic names, and then there's Chinese names, and there's a lot of different names. I'll hopefully not get them all incorrect tonight on the show. Boomer is also here. Hello, Boomer Sooner. Thank you for joining us in the chat. And did I mention Brandon? I think I mentioned Brandon. Looking forward to the new book. As soon as it gets proofread, it will be released sooner than later. As I said, we'll start here in just one moment for the actual live show. And for those of you, again, who are new to the show, you get the show 5 nights a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. This is not where the show airs. This is not our archive. This is just a specialty show that we do on Friday evenings because listeners buy books or they support us by subscribing, etc. And that is what keeps us on air. 15 years on air. Muggs is here. I don't know if I've seen Muggs more than a few times in the chat. Greetings from Portland, Oregon. Yeah, I heard that they have, you guys have no problems in Portland. That's what I was told by fake comedy and by the news. I've seen it myself, that there's all kinds of problems, but hey, they told us there wasn't. So hopefully you're safe in Portland. Gemma Jackson is here. Hello, Gemma. I don't know if I've seen you in the chat before or maybe more than once. And Nick is here. Hello, Nick. Nick and I used to do radio together, Nick Cariotti. Some of you might remember Nick. We used to do radio at WPRK. We did radio out of an office in Orlando for many years. We did a lot of radio together. Some of you might remember Nick. I think Nick did the show. Was it like right after? What was Mike D was still doing the show with us too. I think Nick and I did a lot of shows together, and then Mike came back and we started doing shows together. Which, by the way, Mike will be with us next Friday for a Dogman show. We'll keep the Halloween themed shows going throughout the month of October. I'm thinking about doing a Halloween night special. However, that won't be Halloween night for me. It'll be the next day, so I'll have to sort of figure out what the best timing is, your time US, and then we'll have to translate that to my time and see what works out best for me. I mean, I can do pretty much any time, but it's just a matter of finding the best time. I don't know when if people even go trick or treating anymore, or they do trunk or treat. Some people do Halloween a week before or several days before. I have no idea. So I'll have to try to find a good time that works out. Brennan Wall asked, "Have you ever done a show or deep dive on quantum mechanics?" Yeah, but it's kind of standard, scientific theorizing. So it's not something I necessarily talk about. I've brought elements of that into the show before, for sure. Yes. Cool channel name says, "Do you agree that octo means 8 and December means 10?" Yeah, that's the old Roman calendar. Octagon, 8, octopus, 10, deca, to decimate, to destroy 10% of. Reno Mech said, "I swear Ryan used to come into my surf shop at the Florida Mall." No, I did not go. I don't surf. Never been to, never been to a surf shop. I've never been to I mean, it was definitely back in the Rollins College days, but I don't know what mall is the Florida Mall. Is that, I'm trying to think, is that the one in St. Pete or is that a different mall? 'Cause I don't think I ever even went to the mall. I mean, unless I was going to a movie. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just having a large audience, but there are a lot of people like you, Reno, that I guess they think that they're hearing something different or they're hearing something on the show that's different than what I'm saying. Like I'll give you an example. People email me all the time and say, "I can't believe you had that horrible guest on last night." Like I've had a guest on for weeks, months. "Well, I can't believe you'd interview that person." Well, I didn't interview that person. I don't know who you're talking about. And then they email me back, "Oh, I guess I had the wrong show." Like, yeah, how do you mess that up? I don't understand. I don't understand. That happens all the time. I listened to your show last night. It was so horrible. I can't believe you do a show on that topic. Well, that wasn't my show, so I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe that happens for in real life too. People think, "Hey, I think Ryan used to come into my shop at the mall." Never did. Maybe it was somebody that looked like me, but it definitely wasn't me. Nathan is also here. No, hello, Nathan. I know you're in Arizona. Hope things are going well in Arizona. Um, oh, Cash App closed your account. Congratulations. Yeah, Chase Bank closed my bank account. No explanation, no reasoning whatsoever. That's why I stick with credit unions. They're not the best, but they're better than the big banks. Maybe it's because you listened to my show. They canceled your Cash App. Maybe were you going to donate to or something or buy a book or something? Probably that's why. I'm just joking. Don't get that rumor started. Flux asked, "Are they listening to the show on Ground Zero Plus?" So yeah, they get the show. Most of the time, it's the newer shows. The show comes out in the morning your time, um, so they usually get the shows. They have the archive on their website, but they don't pay us, and we don't have a contract with them, so they just get the show, and it's another one of those things where you explain to people that the show is it's a new show, but you're not going to get it first. And people are like, "Why don't you just put it on here for free? Why don't you do all the work, all the research, all the reading, all the investigation, then just release it for free?" I don't understand why there has to be ads. I don't understand why there has to be, you know, there has to be sometimes I don't hear the show because it's not on this network. Well, it's because this isn't a charity. Although it is charity enough that we do the YouTube shows or the X or the Facebook shows without taking any money. We don't do any kind of donations or anything like that. This is kind of our version of a free show. Plus, a lot of our shows are just a lot of what the show is having people operate on the honor system. Fridays, especially. Boomer Sooner said that was Ryan Gable, Gabel, not Gabla. Yeah. Funny, my name is really, really hard to pronounce for some people. I don't know why that is. And my friend used to call me Ryan Goebbels, like Joseph Goebbels, because I did radio and old pictures of Goebbels in front of a radio talking. And it turns out my friend did an analysis of family history and found out my name actually does derive from Goebbels. So that's funny. That's fun. Doesn't do well for those nasty rumors that people think about me, or those people make up about me. But my name Gable is based on Goebel. So you can call me Ryan Goebbels, perhaps. But even he didn't go into that surf shop in Florida, so I guess it doesn't really matter. Anybody else in the chat? Okay, so we spent about 20 minutes pre-show. I think that's enough. We will start the main show. Let me get the banner set up for the feature presentation, and we will get started. Yeah, no, it's definitely the German in me. It's definitely the German in me. Okay, so that's all you need to know about the show. Mystic Hydra just popped into the chat. Hello, Mystic Hydra. And we are going to play the intro again for those of you who are new listeners just coming across this show. Remember, whatever's happening on YouTube or whatever's happening on X or Facebook, if there's an audio quality issue or if there's something happening that doesn't sound right, that's the stream, that's the internet, that's the, what do they call it? I guess the streaming platform. It's not me or my audio, because if you listen to the actual show, the audio show only, you'll learn very quickly that we have really good audio. I'm very happy about our audio and how it all sounds. So if you hear issues on some other platform, it's because of the other platform in the streaming. If you go to the actual archive, as I showed you, you will not hear any problems with the audio. Anytime in the past we've had problems with audio, I would not do the show. I would maybe record it again or something to that effect, but used to have that problem all the time. Anyway, here are the shows from this week. Jesus is the Reason for the Treason, Celtic Christianity, Have Your Soul Cake and Eat It Too, Halloween Divination with Ancient Intelligence, and tonight, Wheel of the Octagram. They're all in the archive on the website, tstradio.info, or the same website, thesecretteachings.info.info. Please subscribe to the show to get access to the ad-free archive. Please grab a book. Please buy me a coffee/tea/book. That's the Buy Me a Coffee platform, but I think I have it set to Buy Me a Book because I don't drink coffee. To support the show, the links are all down below, and we will get started here in just a moment. You'll hear silence, you'll hear the intro, and we will be off to the races. Stay with us just for a moment.
Hello? Anybody home?
Today, I want you to open your mind.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damning that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists.
It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time.
If you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, then you have a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps.
Tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. Someone who is white is not more special than someone who is black. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
They do not want your children to be educated. They do not want you to think too much.
It was learned that the aliens had been and were then manipulating masses of people through secret societies, witchcraft, magic, the occult, and religion.
They reach into our children in music, television, books.
Right, no children's innocence. How can I disprove lies that are stamped with an official seal?
So if you have the opportunity to stand next to one of these machines, it feels like an altar to an alien god.
Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc is now in the possession of the Army.
Too many others know what's happening out there. And no one, no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
Any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete. A case to be filed under M for Mankind in the Twilight Zone.
It's about time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
It's the heart that says, I will not acquiesce.
Freedom is the privilege to be right. Freedom from the disasters and our mistakes.
You don't connect the dots, it's just a mass of what's all this about.
You are listening to the Secret Teachings Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. Thank you so much for joining us this Friday, October 17th, 2025. Tonight's show is the Wheel of the Octagram, or the Wheel of the Year. The wheel turns. The wheel keeps turning in the sky. As we approach Halloween, we will continue our Halloween series through the next couple of weeks up to Halloween, and also All Saints and All Souls Day, those 2 days. The Triune New Year as we enter into the fall and eventually the winter. If you are a new listener to the Secret Teachings, welcome to the show tonight. I'm happy that you found us somehow, be it on social media or be it on a streaming platform, or maybe you stumbled across this show because you've heard me on other shows. However you got here, thank you for finding the show and taking the time to dig into it a little bit deeper. And maybe you'll become a supporter of the show. Maybe you'll find my book, Occult Arcana, as well, and get a copy of that, digital or physical. That will really keep you busy if you have any time off this holiday season, because that is a very big and very jam-packed book. And we have a huge section in that book on the holidays, on the holy days, what they mean, the origins, and some kind of, I would term them unorthodox interpretations of certain religious symbols. And that unorthodoxy, although in some circles it's not unorthodox, but that unorthodoxy in the mainstream, a lot of the alternative world that we live in and experience through social media, is simply based on, I call them rational interpretations and logical interpretations of literalisms. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Some of you already know this, but for those of you who are new, if you think about the end times, you think about Armageddon, you think about the apocalypse, you think about how it's all going to come crashing down. It's all going to come burning down. There's going to be some horrible destruction of the world by fire and some great war, and most people are going to die, and maybe there'll be a rapture before that, and those that survive, those that don't die from the war and aren't raptured, they'll go through a horrible time of tribulation, and then they'll have their heads cut off on guillotines like Left Behind. And if you've never seen that, that is a Christian movie and book series about how if you don't love Jesus, you get your head cut off. It's a really scary thing to show a 4th and 5th grader, which we were shown in 4th and 5th grade. That scared us a lot, made you want to love Jesus and just get out of here before anything after the rapture happens. But this idea of tribulation and the end times and the resurrection of the dead and the coming of the apocalypse, all of this can logically and rationally be described as the changing of the seasons. It's very simple, although it takes a long time to come to these conclusions when you grow up with a certain perception of what these words mean or what the ideas mean. Take the word apocalypse. Apocalypse simply means to unveil, or it means a great unveiling in Greek. And that great unveiling is the lifting of the veil of nature. And this happens not once, but twice during the year. It happens as we transition from the winter into spring, and it happens as we transition from the summer into the fall. From May, April to October, November, the veil is very, very thin. The veil is what separates our world from the spirit world. And the people who die during the year, whose spirits roam the earth, these are not evil people. These are your parents. These are your grandparents. These are your friends, your family, your spouses, maybe even the family dog, maybe the family goldfish. But they are dead, and their souls, their spirits need to rest. And so when the veil is thinned, particularly around the time of Halloween, the Day of the Dead and other festivals, this is the time in which people want to assist those spirits, those souls, to the other side. This is largely where we get the idea for our lighted root vegetables and our lighted jack-o'-lanterns. This is where we get the idea for leaving food out. This is where we get the idea for costumes. This is also where we get the idea for the raising of the dead in the end times. I did a show earlier this week called Celtic Christianity. It's been very popular, very good show. People have really enjoyed it based on the messages that I've gotten on social media and my email. And it's important to sort of recap that show very briefly and use it to understand what these end times really are. Use it to understand what the end of the year Thanksgiving feasts and festivals and holidays are really about. So you've probably heard me say this already this week, but the Celtic peoples, specifically the people in Ireland and Scotland, Wales and England, Celtic peoples and the Druids, their priestly class, specifically the Druids, but the Celtic people in general, believed in an omnipotent God. They believed in the path of souls. They believed in the everlasting life of the soul. They believed in exorcisms. They believed in using crosses to perform those and to obtain protection. Those crosses were made out of oak tree branches, usually, but any tree branch would do. They believed in a Madonna and child. They believed in resurrection. They believed in a savior. They believed, in essence, exactly what the Christians believed, except they believed it to be natural. They believed it to be a part of nature, both here on earth and above in the stars. They practiced what a lot of people would call Wiccanism or paganism or something to that effect. It's not accurate, though, because in those days, if you were practicing some form of nature worship or vegetation veneration, as I call it, you were not a pagan, because pagan means to practice something that is unorthodox, abnormal, and it's a religion of the people that live kind of in isolation in the countryside. During the Roman Empire, most people were pagan. So paganism, as this little sect of folk lore and legend and myths that people believe in the countryside, was actually applicable to the Christians when Christianity began to spread. Christianity was actually a pagan religion, and pagan religions were actually institutional, maybe dogmas, if you'd like to use that term, but institutional practices. And when you learn about the Druids in this particular case, you learn that they're actually scientists, and they were trying to study and understand the natural world, which, by the way, that natural world that God created, right? God created the natural world. And to study the natural world is to do God's will, to do God's bidding, to live in harmony with nature's givings and takings. And I think in understanding that, and understanding that the Druids and their belief system was around at least 1500 BC, before Christ, before Common Era, they were part of a long line of peoples from all around the world that had very similar beliefs. Zoroastrianism is considered one of the oldest religions on planet Earth. This is a Persian religion that Mithraism essentially grew out of. And Zoroastrianism, like the Druidic belief, had a very, very similar foundation. It's all based in nature, good and evil, light and dark, warmth and cold, etc. And this was another basis for the spread of the Christian religion and the Abrahamic faiths overall. That's important to understand because it means that the Abrahamic faiths, specifically the Abrahamic faiths, they're not wrong. It's just how you choose to interpret the symbols and the stories that are told. And so if we go back to the apocalypse and Armageddon, Muslims believe in that. Christians believe in that. Jews believe in that. A lot of people believe in that. I mean, you think about Ragnarok, people that might align themselves with Norse mythology, it's a little bit different than an Abrahamic faith. But in this mythology, you also have an end of the world, a final battle. And in the northern European regions, in the very, very cold and desolate and areas that are starving for sunlight, these are places where the elements are much more extreme. And that's why you find a much more extreme people and a much more extreme and hardy mythology and mythological pantheon. And you'll know, if you've ever read anything about mythology from that part of the world, if you ever read about Odin, Odin was crucified to a tree. You'll also know perhaps that he wasn't the only one. Indra was crucified or became a tree. Attis was crucified or became a tree. Set was crucified or was tied to a post. Prometheus, likewise. Saint Sebastian. And of course, the Druids used crosses for very similar reasons, because that crucifixion that was taking place was the crucifixion of a natural body, a celestial body, the crucifixion of the sun. And no, for the record, I'm not getting my information from Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is like a 50-50 toss-up whether or not it's accurate or not. This is not where I'm getting my information from, for the record. I'm getting my information from standard mythologies that are quite universal in what they talk about and what they portray. And so Armageddon, that final battle, that Ragnarok, that end of the world scenario that everybody typically believes in Western civilization, Ragnarok, the end of the world, Armageddon, is nothing more than a jihad to decapitate the infidel in an Arabic sense. And all the jihad is the battle, as in Zoroastrianism, between good and evil. What is good is light and what is evil is dark. What is good is warm and what is evil is cold. And that, as simply as it can be put, that is the battle between good and evil. That is the final battle. That final battle takes place every year at this time. It's reversed in the southern hemisphere, but in the northern hemisphere, it takes place every year at this time. Right now, you get up one day and it's a little bit cold and you realize, well, the fall's here. Some people like the fall, some people don't like the fall. And then you wake up another day and maybe it's warm again. And you think, oh, I thought the fall was here. I thought it was finally the fall. It wasn't going to be as hot anymore. And now it's warm today. Why is it warm today? Well, we go through this transitional period, and that is the battle. That's the jihad. That is Armageddon, the battle between good and evil. And this battle is ongoing because in the springtime, Jesus is resurrected on Easter. Conveniently, the exact same day that Attis was resurrected, conveniently the same exact day that the Druids celebrated the resurrection of their Savior, 1,500 to 3,000 years before Christ. Again, Christians have the right answer. They just take it a little bit too literally, I think. That's a kind way to put it. So I don't say that to disparage Christians or Muslims or Jews, but I say that because the Abrahamic faiths are not, first of all, the only faiths. And second of all, there's very little unique about them. When people talk about the 10 Commandments, oh, that's a Jewish covenant, and that's a very, very unique thing. No, it's not a very unique thing. The commandments, whether there's 10 or there's 600 or 620 or more, are universal. They can be found all throughout the world in one version or another, in one form or another. They're not unique to Moses. Moses isn't even the only lawgiver or lawkeeper. There are dozens and dozens of lawkeepers and lawgivers around the world, of civilizing gods like Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, Osiris, and so on and so forth. So Armageddon, that final battle, is the battle between light and dark, the battle between warmth and cold. And in these months, after the summer solstice, the sun is dying. And in the months following the resurrection of the sun, or the birth of the sun, the rebirth of the sun on the winter solstice, the sun begins to gain strength. Everybody believed this because everybody could see the sun and watch what it was doing. And so they developed very similar mythologies. And so the wheel of the octagram, the wheel that keeps on turning and spinning, is both the changing of the seasons, but it's also the wheel in the sky, the solar disk, the original flying saucer, by the way, made famous in those depictions of a disk with wings in Egypt, but also found with various characters in Mesopotamia, characters inside of a wheel, like Ezekiel's wheel, or the wheel of Krishna, or the Greek wheel of Christ. And that's what the octagram is. It's the wheel of Christ. It's the wheel of the sun. It's the wheel of the year. And as it turns, there is growth and death. There is a transition between good and evil, evil and good, light and dark, dark and light, warmth and cold, cold and warmth. That's what Armageddon is. And the apocalypse is the unveiling of that. And the raising of the dead are the spirits and the souls that move through the world, many of which need assistance or hope for assistance from their family members who light the path and light the way to the other side, leave food out perhaps. And of course, since that veil is thin, that allows for your ancestors to be contacted as well. Maybe you dress nice, leave some food out for them too. This is the lifting of the veil of Isis. I am Isis, all that has been and ever will be. No mortal man hath ever me unveiled. No mortal man can unveil nature, but an immortal, everlasting soul and spirit, just like the Celts believed, could definitely lift the veil of Isis. And that veil, when it is lifted, exposes the bare-breasted bounty of nature. Hence why Isis has grapes which cover her breast, and have wheat which covers her breast. And the grapes and the wheat are obviously made into what? Wine and bread, the blood and the body of the Savior, manufactured from a mixture of sunlight and moisture, a mixture of masculine and feminine forces that provide us, after 9 months, with a bounty that we call Thanksgiving, a Halloween celebration, a Halloween festival, a bounty to end the year in thanks for the abundance, the cornucopia of nature. And we hope that this bounty will feed us through the winter months, those months of tribulation, those months when the horses of the apocalypse become a little bit more aggressive. So it's natural. Aggressive because in the summertime, the red horse has a sword and it comes to conquer. And this is a good thing because you want the sun, you want the warmth, you want the light, you want the crops. And then in the fall, we have the fall of man. And the fall of man indicates that we are going into a very perilous dangerous time. The fall of man, the apocalypse, Armageddon, the lifting of the veil of Isis, or even Amaterasu. I've been to the Isejingu Shrine in Japan, and this is a 2,000-plus-year-old religion that predates Christianity, a sun goddess who goes into a cave for 3 days and is resurrected. And in that story, you also have, if you go to the shrine, and you'll see that she is covered in a white veil, very similar to Isis, although Isis's veil is usually red, but it is a veil nonetheless. The white veil that a woman would wear when she is married, lifting of the veil. So what is happening is the black horse is riding. In Greek mythology, the black horse is Hades, who kidnaps Persephone. And when you read that myth the first time, you read things like Persephone was raped by Hades, and that's just such a horrible thing. We shouldn't even teach mythology in school. This is very anti-woman. This is very, very violent. I've heard those arguments before. We can't. Greek mythology, Zeus was raping people. We can't teach rape. This is horrible. Men doing this to women. This is wrong. We're feminists. It's kind of funny because it's a metaphor. Persephone represents the spring and the summer, and Hades, the black horse, kidnaps her. The black horse is the fall. Where does the spring and summer go? Where does the sun, where do the greens go? They go underground. They don't grow, so they're stuck underground because the frost on the fields. That's the story of Persephone and Hades. And Hades comes to judge. Did you prepare for the winter? Did you prepare enough food? Did you prepare your family? Did you prepare your community? This is your judgment. The scales of Christ, the scales of Saint Michael, the scales of Santa Muerte, the scales of Hades, the black horse of the apocalypse. And the indication that we are moving beyond even the fall of man, beyond even these fall months, into an even darker time, comes when the leaves all fall and the trees and plants and grass and everything seems to die. It goes into a state of suspended animation and growth, which is Persephone in the underworld. And then the next horse comes and begins riding. And it's shocking to me that some people actually think that there's like a stable on the clouds and that there are actual physical horses that are going to run down from the sky and run around the earth or something. I just don't really understand how this person holds a job down or is able to function in reality at all. It's clearly not literal. And these horses correspond to the 4 seasons. And the 4th horse, the pale horse, chloros or chlorophyll, chloros, the pale horse in Greek, is a pale yellow, pale green horse that represents the leaves. And what follows him is death, because it is the death of the winter. And then after the winter, the white horse rides, and we get spring. And when the spring occurs, we get the resurrection. For those of you who may have seen this in the news, and for those of you who have not seen this in the news, a little reminder and a little piece of information you didn't know. This is from the Catholic News Agency. The Pope was gifted a purebred Arabian horse, a white horse. I've seen people say, well, this is the pale horse. This indicates Armageddon. Common mistake. Common misconception. It's not a pale horse. It's a white horse. A pale horse, sure, it might look white or ghostly, but a pale horse is actually green-yellow, kind of pale. The white horse is a symbol of the spring. So no, this particular story has very little, if anything, to do with the mythos and with the metaphor of the 4 horses of the apocalypse, and this having anything to do with Armageddon, because this white horse is actually the horse of the spring. Not really sorry to break that to you, but you should probably know that. However, it doesn't really matter what we think, because it matters what powerful people think, and it matters what image is being cast and projected and framed in the media. So for anybody thinking, well, no, Armageddon's a real thing, and the horses are real, and look at these events that are occurring, they're biblical. Well, yeah, sure. But that's because someone is manufacturing them. And we know someone is manufacturing them. And we know that there isn't a singular source of them because every culture in the world that has any kind of conscious awareness has a story in some way, in some shape or form that aligns with these ideas. Because everybody sees the sun, everybody sees the moon, everybody sees the stars, and we tend to just call them different things by different names. So it's not literal. And this transition period of the year, the different horses correspond to the 4 points on that wheel of the year that we have. The 4 points, the winter and summer solstices, and the spring and the vernal equinoxes. That's your cross. And then you get an X through that because you get midpoints. And the midpoints, as you can see on your screen, and for those who cannot see this, type in Wheel of the Year online and you'll see it. Or some of you already probably know this. The Wheel of the Year, that turning of both the cyclical disk of nature and the wheel of the sun, takes us from Yule, the winter solstice, to Imbolc, or Candlemas. And another very important symbol of that is Brigid, or the cross of Brigid. Interestingly, the cross of Brigid, I've never seen one actually woven out of some kind of natural product like people might use plants or something like that. But I went to a shrine in Japan and they actually had a cross of Brigid. And I thought that's a European thing. But they didn't call it the cross of Brigid. It was a symbol. It was called the Sun Torii Gate. It was a gate to the sun. And they had little crosses there here in Japan as well at the Marriage Stones, very famous site, one of the most famous sites in the world, actually. Most iconic sites in the world. And then the spring equinox comes. So Imbolc is February 2nd. We get the spring equinox after that. And then another midpoint between the spring equinox and summer solstice is Beltan or Beltane or Walpurgis or May Eve. And then we get the summer solstice in June. Then we get Lughnasadh, the midpoint between the summer solstice and the fall equinox, Mabon. And then after Mabon to Yule, the winter solstice and the fall equinox, the midpoint is Samhain or Samhain, or what we call Halloween. Not only is there nothing evil or dark, except for actual darkness, not only is there nothing evil or dark about these things, they epitomize God's creation. They are God's creation. And people should not be freaked out about that. This should be embraced. And in fact, as I've noted on the show recently this week, I think that if you go around and you go about picking apart the myths and picking apart the legends and the lore and the traditions and casting them into the fires of what you think is hell, hell, by the way, isn't fire, it's actually an ice palace, it's frozen, then you are actually, you are contributing to the spread of evil. And this is why I'm so critical of Christianity, because I think Christians are contributing to the spreading of evil. And I think certain Christian doctrines have contributed to one war after another in the name of Christ. And when people say, what about the Muslims? Well, I get that. But the Christians are usually the ones that say that they don't do that. Muslims are usually proud of it. The Christians pretend like they don't. You do the same thing. But ultimately, the war that should be fought is not a war with other people. It's a war with dark forces. And those dark forces aren't children. Those dark forces aren't Muslims. Those dark forces are just the darkness outside. It's the cold. So the thing is, we don't have much of a context or perspective for what it would be like to live, at least nobody listening to this show right now, what it would be like to live in little shacks with no air conditioning, no access to the internet, no social media, no guarantee that you're going to get food, no guarantee that you're going to survive the winter. We don't really have context for that. And so when you live in those conditions, the veil is very thin because right there, right outside that door, is a very dark and cold place. And nobody's coming to save you except for the sun when things begin to warm and melt and when there's a resurrection around what we call Easter. So if that is how you're living and you're not sure that you're going to survive, people might say, well, that creates superstition. Yeah, well, superstition is just defined as things that are left over from an older belief that we don't really understand what they are, where they come from, or really even care to for that matter. Superstition can also be interpreted in other ways, but it's not really superstitious. It's for those people at those times, it's actually very logical. And I wonder too, I mean, how many people actually think in those days? How many people actually thought 1500 BC that there were actual spirits roaming around their house? Maybe some, we don't know. Maybe some. But it might have just been a story. We tell stories, right? We tell stories about Santa and the Easter Bunny. And in 1,000 years or 2,000 years, people might look back and think, well, they believed that they were really advanced in 2025, but they still told stories about mystical beings that squeeze down a chimney and leave presents. And you'd have no context 2,000 years from now, probably, about what that story actually is. And why, even in a super technically advanced civilization, we still tell these stories. We tell them about giant bunnies and giant fat guys from one of the poles, and we tell them about leprechauns and turkeys that are begging to be sacrificed at the White House. And we still tell these stories today, even in a Christian, quote, Christian nation. And the context that you would have for that in even 50 years, really, I mean, even in a lifetime, changes. So how many people in those days actually believed that there were real spirits? Nevertheless, they still personified those creaks and cracks and those strange sounds and the rattling of the windows, the doors, the wind whipping through a community, that dark, cold winter time, that winter storm. Well, those are spirits. Those are fairies, which are different than demons, because demons, if you have the name, you can exorcise them. Fairies, having the name of the fairy is not actually a good thing. You want to call them good neighbors or good friends. You don't want to call them by their actual fairy name. That's not good, according to the legends, the lore. So fairies are not demons. They're just mischievous spirits. But if you ever watch Pan's Labyrinth, you know the little fairies and the imps and Pan, they all appear to be, they look evil, or they look malicious, or they just look kind of diabolical. But ultimately, Pan is leading Ophelia through the labyrinth, and then she meets her real family. She realizes at the end she's divine. She's a soul. The movie itself, I think the way that it was originally, the original trailer, I just watched it last night, by the way, because I was looking for a good Halloween movie. So I watched the trailer last night, and I kind of forgot. I knew it was a really good movie, but I kind of forgot how really good it really was. And when I watched the trailer again, the trailer was something to the effect of, this movie is based on a fairy tale, a legend about a girl who's really a princess, who really is she's very royal. And she has to go through these trials and these tribulations in order to realize her true self. And she sacrifices her own blood. It's the blood of Christ, the self-sacrifice, doesn't kill her sibling, the little baby. And the blood runs down into the labyrinth. And she goes into the tree, which literally, not figuratively, like it literally represents the ovaries and the birth canal. She gets covered in all that muck and comes out with the key. And through this whole process, she eventually, the Pan, the goat that's so evil, actually ends up being her guide. So this is a great Halloween movie, I'd say, but it's a great movie to explain what the spirit or the soul is and how it is in mythology and in legend and lore and folklore, how it is explained in regard to the elements, in regard to nature. And we're trapped in these bodies, let's say, and there are things that are also trapped in this world, and we are basically personifications of an infinite concept or an infinite deity or an infinite mind, in the same way that the little fairies or whatever they might be are expressions of the wind blowing. They're expressions of the windows, the doors rattling. They're expressions of nature. And this is God's creation, and you'd want to live in harmony with that, which is why the Druids would dance from east, where the sun rises, to west, where the sun sets, in the same way that the whirling dervishes of Persia would dance in circles. They would spin because they're aligning themselves with forces and powers that are more powerful than them. The planets, the spheres, the rotations. It's really strange when Christianity began to spread and the snakes were driven out of Ireland that the Christians basically banned dancing. They hated dancing. Dancing was considered evil and wicked. Another example of pulling up those protective barriers against evil. Because if dancing was so evil, the Druids were so evil, then why did the Druids themselves think that dancing from west to east was evil? That dancing in the direction of the setting sun was evil? They had their own version of evil, and they were exercising it by crosses and rituals, just like the Christians were. When that veil is thinned and those things are moving around, and you're not sure if you're going to survive the winter, and you've taken 10% of your crop, and you've had a Thanksgiving, and you've tithed, and you've preserved 1% of that, hopefully for the next year, just in case, you have a bad harvest next year. That's where tithing comes from, agriculturally speaking. When you've done that, the spirits are roaming around. Now it's time to communicate with them. So one of the most common forms of divination were apples, or you'd have something like nuts that were thrown into a fire, or you would have cabbage pulling or kale pulling, or you would have some places, I think Scotland, you'd have leek pulling. And all of these things were used to divine the future, except divination of the future was not like, well, am I going to get that new job? Am I going to win the lottery? It's more like, am I going to get married, or am I going to die next year? And that's primarily what divination was for. It was for determining if you were and who you were going to marry. And if you already were married, it was determining if you were going to have a prosperous year. Maybe if you give birth to more children, or whatever the case might be. And none of that, by any stretch of the imagination, could be considered evil or wicked. But they're divining the future to see who's going to get married. Yeah, and you still do this at Christian weddings, where you throw a bouquet of flowers backwards, and whoever catches it's the next to get married. You still do this with apple bobbing today. Same thing. So divination was a very important part, because the wheel was going to turn whether or not you liked it. If you're like me, you're not a big fan of the winter. I don't like the cold. I don't like the dark. But that wheel's going to turn either way, whether I like it or not. So it's better to embrace it and to find some kind of hope and protection in whatever ways that you can, whatever methods that you can. It's a 50-50 shot, success or failure, hope or damnation. This is what Halloween is all about. And if you want to have a true, authentic Halloween, you bake soul cakes. Really easy to do, really cheap to do. You can do it if you're like me, you can't have wheat. You can just do it with rice flour. You don't want to eat egg. I don't particularly like most animal products at all. So I don't eat meat at all. But if you want to try making a soul cake without an egg, and you want to do like a more, I don't want to say vegan. It's not really vegan. It's more like for allergies and for other reasons. But you can make a soul cake with flaxseed and water for an egg. You can use some oil. You can use any kind of sweetener you want. But it's mostly a little cake made with lots of spices. And then you give them out, and people pray for what that soul cake represents, the soul of some family member who passed away. Soul cakes. I think we should be giving these out for Halloween. Maintain the tradition. It's also cheap. You can make them in abundance. Some of them are actually healthy for you, rather than thinking apples have razors in them, which I do still believe is a clever piece of propaganda courtesy of the candy companies. Apples are dangerous. You can't eat an apple. There's razors in them, but eat this candy bar that has any number of chemicals that you can find in a factory or in a mechanic shop, or antifreeze that you can find in your garage. This candy is much better than the apple. There's no razors in it. So now that we have a pretty good understanding of what Halloween is, we have a pretty good understanding of what the traditions are and where they come from. Now we can expand, and we can look at exactly what the wheel is, the wheel of the octagram. But before we do that, I will pause for just a moment and let you know that you are listening to the Secret Teachings Radio. I'm Ryan Gable, your host, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us on this episode of the show. I'd also like to point out that we are not just for Fridays an audio show, we are also a video show for Fridays, courtesy of listeners who subscribe to the show, who support the show through Buy Me a Coffee, and primarily through people who subscribe or buy a book at tstradio.info. That's tstradio.info. Whether you're in audio or video form, you can look down below and you'll find links to all of that and more for the Secret Teachings Radio show. We also have a chat room going. Before the show, we did a pre-show, and we looked through the chat and commented. There's a lot of new listeners in the chat, though, from the pre-show. So if anybody has a question, or if anybody wants to throw something into the show, I've been giving this presentation, and I've been thinking that I don't want to forget the chat, because sometimes I bring up like another window, and I almost forget that I'm doing a live show sometimes. So I wanted to look at the chat just for a brief moment and see if there's anything in the chat. If you have a question, maybe you posted it earlier. If you have another question, please send it again, and I'll comment on it on the show. But someone had asked about the nature of the soul, and I think the question is, do you believe in like the everlasting nature of the soul? And I think you'd have to really define what these things are. The spirit, the soul is kind of like your emotional body. The spirit is kind of the animating force. And so, yeah, there's an animating force behind me moving around. There's an animating force behind what you're hearing out of this mic. I don't know what it is. Call it a spirit. So, yeah, I believe that there's something there. And I don't really think it even matters to define it. I don't really think it matters to debate it. There's clearly something animating the body. The body is not the only thing that there is. So, yeah, there's definitely something there for sure to answer that question. But also don't just concern yourself with what I think. Don't think that I have all the answers, because I don't. Because I could listen as a listener and not as a host. I could listen to this show and put myself on the outside, and I would sit here and be like, yeah, but what about that? What about this? What about that? And you're right. What about this? What about that? There's always another angle. There's always another story. We're going to look at the octagram, the 8-spoked wheel, the 8-pointed star. And no matter how many of these stars I go through, no matter how many I show you, I guarantee you that there's going to be somebody that says, well, what about this star? You're covering it up. You didn't mention this star. Well, okay, I can't mention every single one. I'm not going, I'm not going to spend 5-6 years in college doing a doctorate on 8-pointed stars. I have a limited amount of time to prepare for the show. So if anybody, there's always another one. Yes, I get that. There's always another angle. There's always another part of the story. The same thing goes for Halloween. There's always another angle to costumes and leaving out food and divination rituals and all of this. I know there's someone that thinks, but the Druids practiced human sacrifice. Well, yeah, okay, but you have to understand this. Number one, they did practice human sacrifice. But what does human sacrifice mean? Does human sacrifice mean they took people and burned them in a wicker man? Yeah, it does. And they did that to criminals and people that that were really bad. However, they also didn't do that for too long because they stopped doing this and ended up sacrificing either animals or they just sacrificed bounties, vegetables, grains, flowers. And at some point, they started sacrificing people symbolically. However, you also have to note that a lot of the human sacrifice stories also came from Christian writers who were so hell-bent on convincing people that these druids, with their identical beliefs and their identical symbols, were evil and barbarous and demonic. It's kind of like that thing with Columbus Day recently, where people are sharing these memes about how all the native peoples performed human sacrifices. As if you can group ancient cultures, as if you can group the Australasian DNA of the people of the Amazon and the European DNA based on Maltaboy in, I believe it was Siberia, with the quote Native American populations of the Central and North America, particularly. If you can take the Aztecs, which were like a latecomer, and say they represent all of that, you're being very insincere and you're very ignorant of the fact. That doesn't mean that those populations weren't warring with one another, but it's really stupid, and it's like a really gross form of propaganda to be like, well, you know, these Christians came here and they civilized these barbarian savages who were just slaughtering people to the gods. No, that's not really what happened. That's more than an oversimplification of history. And it's a really disgusting one. And this is another reason I can't stand any of these left, right-wing talking points. I mean, I did a show earlier this week. I think was it Monday? It was Monday. Maybe it was the Celtic Christianity show. But we talked about how you have these conservative right-wing Christian commentators that said, no, the Indians weren't conquered. They were saved from their own barbarism. You know, they were here for thousands of years, didn't have a written language, I'm thinking, like, some of the people posting this, I thought were smart. They've got to be being paid to post this stuff. Like, have you ever seen, I don't know, Serpent Mound in Ohio? Have you ever seen Cahokia? Have you ever seen, I don't know, the Amazon? You know, the Amazon is a terraforming project. You ever seen Terra Preta? The black soil of the Amazon? You ever seen the petroglyphs all throughout South, Central, and North America? Have we ever considered that most of the mounds that were built have been destroyed and that there were tens of thousands of them, more than what you'd even see now? It's so stupid. Oh, they didn't have anything. Really? They didn't have anything. They didn't have a written language. The Maya calculated millions and millions and millions of years using complex mathematical calculations. They were astronomers. It's just such a stupid thing. And then people think, oh, you must celebrate Native American Day. Nope, don't celebrate that either. I think Columbus Day and Native Indigenous American Day, I think that they're both kind of silly, and I don't celebrate either one of them. I think there's another way to look at it, and that's what this show is all about. So what we're going to do now is I am going to bring onto the screen, for those of you who are listening, for those of you who are not listening, I will do my best to describe what I'm putting on the screen or explain how you can go look it up for yourself. I actually went back and listened to our Friday show with Mike D, and I'm listening to it, and I thought it was really good, and then I realized this could be better if there were, you know, several instances where I sort of paused and explained to listeners what they were not seeing, because the majority of the audience is audio only. So I had to think about that and think, well, I probably should have explained some of the things that we were laughing at seeing on the screen. People need to actually have a description. So I'll do my best to do that tonight. And again, I want to thank you all for joining us on the show. I know you have a lot of options to listen to shows like this, especially around Halloween, and hopefully shows like this and our Celtic Christianity show and our other shows this week, hopefully they help to inspire you to read and to had some listeners tell me that they started reading about this stuff, exploring other religions or other symbols. And that's really what I want you to do. I'm really happy that people are doing that. It's also very humbling that people are doing that. Thank you for taking what I say and taking it into consideration. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up on the screen the Wheel of the Year. So you can see the Wheel of the Year. There's all sorts of different representations of this. So the Wheel of the Year, if you're not seeing this, the Wheel of the Year is what I was describing earlier. It is a wheel with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spokes. The cross, or the lowercase t, holds up the winter and summer solstices. That's the vertical. And the horizontal is the fall and the spring equinoxes. The midpoints between those, as I explained earlier, are held up by an additional cross turned to its side, which is an X. And so with the X and with the cross, you get 8 points. And that 8-pointed wheel is sometimes described as a star. It is sometimes described as a, depending on what culture you're in, sometimes described as a disc, which it is, I suppose. It's also just a wheel, or the wheel of a chariot, which was applicable to the time. I see Mistos Dokos in the chat says Dharma wheel. I think the Dharma wheel is kind of like an octagram. And I think I even have a Dharma symbol in one of these, on one of these picture slides here. So to keep it very simple, what you would be seeing if you were watching the show is a variety of 8-pointed stars or 8-pointed objects. And they all relate back to this Wheel of the Year. Now, it depends on the culture. There are some cultures where you see these 8-pointed stars, and they're described slightly differently than how we would describe something like the Vegvisir. I will show you what that is while I talk about it for a moment. That is the Vegvisir. The Vegvisir is a runic Nordic symbol. It's also known as the Wayfinder. And this particular symbol, known as the Wayfinder, you might think, well, the Wayfinder, and then you read about other 8-pointed stars, the Wayfinder, that sounds different than what these other stars supposedly represent. But see, the Wayfinder, or the compass, was a protective talisman, a directional amulet to survive the harsh winter months, especially in northern European regions where they went on and on and on. And it's a compass. It's a guide. I see Flux in the chat just said, yeah, it's like a compass. Exactly. It's a compass. It's a guide to guide you in the right direction. It's also a wheel. You follow the wheel like the whirling dervishes follow the planets. It's a guide. Now, when I had shared this on our social media account the other day, because I had found an 8-pointed talisman at a Buddhist temple here in Japan, I had somebody say, yeah, but that Vegvisir is only a few hundred years old. And they're right. It is only a few hundred years old. At least that's what we're told. It's a few hundred years old. It is. But that doesn't mean that it's not based on an even more ancient concept, or that there aren't other examples of the Vegvisir or of the 8-pointed star, which themselves are far more ancient. And of course, the reason that people would say, well, the Vegvisir is only 150, 200, 250 years old is because there can't be any connection to Christianity prior to Christianity, right? So we'll just ignore the Druids and the Zoroastrian cult, and we'll just ignore all that. We'll also just ignore the Bhagavad Gita. We'll ignore the Vegvisir, the concept that it embodies. We'll ignore the whole 8-pointed, 8-spoked wheel. We'll ignore all that stuff because it doesn't fit into the paradigm and the narrative that we're framing and we've created. So yeah, the Vegvisir is not that old, but the concept embodied in it is as old as time. It's as old as people having conscious awareness of their surroundings and trying to survive, in a more contemporary, aware, conscious, manner. Not just a horse that's standing out in a field somewhere, like the horse is there. It knows it's there, but it doesn't know that it knows it's there. It's like it's aware of certain basic things. But when we become aware of more complex things, we start to develop and learn that there are things in the world that we can align ourselves with or misalign ourselves with, and they can guide us forward or they can inhibit us. And these are concepts that lead to the development of certain symbols, which that's what this is. It's not like just 200 years ago. The Norse people 200 years ago just decided, these winters are really tough. Maybe we should find a way to protect ourselves from them. Like, it's so silly. And I always, yes, I do pick on Christians because they are the primary, in the United States, the primary source of this detesting and rejecting of just basic fundamental facts of human nature and human history and mythology, etc. Don't hate them, but they're the primary source of this. And if someone else were the primary source, I'd have no issue saying that. I mean, I say that about Judaism, sometimes about Islam, but those shows about Islam are a dime a dozen. So that's why we don't focus on that very often. So what I want to show you alongside of the Wheel of the Year is this little talisman. And I actually have it here on my desk too. I took a picture of it when I first got it at the Buddhist temple. But I have this little talisman. You can hear the little bell. I'll hold this up on the screen so you can see it. I have this little talisman. And I actually think that I have two of these. So what happened was I went to Himeji. My wife and I went to Himeji, Japan. And we went to Enyoji Temple. Enyoji Temple is famous as a Buddhist temple. If you're a Buddhist, you might know about it. It's probably more famous because some of the movie The Last Samurai was filmed there. That's the Tom Cruise movie. So they filmed some of that movie there. But it's also famous for other reasons. It's famous because it's a very ancient shrine, very ancient temple. It dates back over 1,000 years, or roughly to 1,000 years. The complex itself is even older than that. And even though it's been burned by fire and they've rebuilt it, there are some places that are possibly even older than that. As I said, the Isejingu shrine, which they rebuild every 20 years, that shrine is, or at least the idea embodied in the shrine, not the shrine itself, because they rebuild it, but the idea behind the shrine and the ideas that are embodied in the Amaterasu myth are over 2,000 years old. And they are the core of Christianity. And that's something that you find even over here in Japan. I mean, it's the land of the rising suns. It's the land of Christ's resurrection. There's even a myth that Christ came to Japan and it ended up dying here at the age of like 110 or something, I think was the story. It's a myth. It's not real, but it's still a cool little story. So anyway, we went to this temple. And at the temple, we're looking around, and I came across this talisman. And I thought, it looks really familiar. Did I see that before and not buy it and wish I did? Or did I buy it and forgot that I bought it? Because I bought a lot of amulets, talismans, omamori, and things like that here in Japan when I first traveled here. I actually haven't even gone into my little box and see to see if I had bought this before, but I knew that, well, even if I have it, I'll have two. They're cool. I'm going to buy it anyway. So I bought it just so I knew that I would have it, because this temple is really high up on a mountain. And you have to take, if you're in Himeji, you have to take well, it depends on where you are, but most of the time, if you're in central Himeji, you have to take a bus, you have to take or taxi, or you have to walk. I walked the first time. You have to take a cable car, and then you have to walk another 15, 20 minutes or 30 minutes, depending on how fast you walk, up to the temple. So it's on top of a mountain, Mount Shosha. And these pictures from the Himeji website, they don't really, I don't even think they do it justice of how beautiful this place is or how high up it really is. This is the main temple here. You can see the supports for it. So you go up there to this Buddhist temple, and I found this little amulet talisman. So I bought it, and as I was going back down the mountain, my mind is running wild. I'm thinking of the different correlations, the different similarities between this talisman, as you can see, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points. I kept thinking, how many examples of this are there? How many examples of this 8-pointed star or this 8-pointed wayfinder or this 8-pointed directional compass are there? And the ones that came to mind, the first one that came to mind was not the Dharma wheel. It was not Buddhist, even though it's a Buddhist temple. The first one that came to mind was the Star of Ishtar. And the Star of Ishtar is like your ace card. It's like your trump card. So if you're playing cards with people that are super religious and you throw down, the Vagvasir, and they say, yeah, well, that's only 200 years old. Here's Jesus. The ace card is your Ishtar star, because the Ishtar star is like 4,000 plus BC. So when they're like, well, here's Jesus, year 0, you're like, yep, well, here's the Ishtar star or the Inanna star. That's 4,000 years before Christ. And then, of course, they make up their own card and draw on a piece of paper and say, yeah, but Jesus created everything, so he wins. And then, you can't converse with these people. It's the same symbolism. It's the same imagery. The Greek wheel of Christ, it's the same exact thing. What spells out Christ in Greek, it's the same thing, same story. So for those of you who cannot see this, what I have here, this little bell that you hear, it's a little gold circle, and it has 8 arrows. It's an 8-spoked wheel, and not relevant necessarily to our conversation, but in the center is what appears to be almost like, it's not, I don't think it's quartz. I don't know what you think that is. It's not quartz. I don't think it's a crystal. It's a little like reflective ball. And then it has the bell, because bells bring harmony to the beast. Bell, Beauty and the Beast. Bells bring harmony to the beast. One of the first forms of medicine, music. And just like Christians have bells that tell people, all right, it's noon. All right, time to come down to church, time for church service. Or you ring the bell because spirits of mischievous nature they don't like the bell. They run away from the bell. Evil hates this. Evil hates this. That's why Santa has bells. Santa has bells because he's riding at night, and he's riding in the dark and the cold, and got to have something to ward off evil. So that's what it is. It's a little gold circle with those 8 points. Okay. This picture that I have on the screen, I'll bring it back up. This is the picture that I took, and my mind just started running wild. What are all these different correlations? So the first thing that came to my mind was the Star of Ishtar and the Wheel of the Year. But the more that I researched it, the more I realized that there's just so many other examples of this, too many to really be able to hold them all in my head. I can't hold all this stuff in my head. So I had to make a little file and start getting the pictures. And I had to go through some pronunciation websites to find out how to pronounce some of these, because there's like native languages or indigenous languages, I should say. There's languages that I'm just not good at pronouncing, I suppose. So anyway, I went through and I found all of these different examples, and I wanted to share these with you tonight on the show. So the first thing you see here is my little talisman. The second thing you see is the Wheel of the Year. You notice that it's the same thing. It's the 8-spoked wheel. And although this is considered, and I have the actual translation of it here from the kanji. I can read a few of them, but not enough to translate it without a translator. This is translated as something to the effect of the treasure of accomplishment. And, you can interpret that however you want, but the treasure of accomplishment, or it's gold. So that's like enlightenment. And that really is the treasure of accomplishment. And you have to come around full circle, and you have to be resurrected. And that maybe that's part of it. The 8 different directions, the 8 different points, there's different ways to interpret it. But in Buddhism, this is called the treasure of accomplishment, or at least that's what the talisman says from the temple of Ingyoji. And then the Wheel of the Year, there it is again. And these 8 points on this talisman correspond to the wheel. Let's look at some of these other images here. There's a whole bunch of them. This is the Lakota star. It's also known as the Hope star. And this one, I had forgotten about this one. So when I looked it up and I found the Hope star, I thought, I know the Hope star. This is the Lakota star. This is a quilt. You can actually buy these online. These are, I didn't realize how popular they were. Some people, they hand make these and they sell them. So I think it's pretty beautiful, but it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points all the way through, all the way to the center. And you'll notice that as we look at some of these stars, some of them look like crosses, and some of them look like stars, and some of them look like sigils, but they all have the same meaning. They all have a very similar design, but they all have the same meaning, and they all have the same purpose. They're symbols of protection. They're symbols that represent celestial bodies. The symbols that represent the gods, the goddesses, nature. Take your pick, but they all pretty much represent the same thing. This next star, and we'll look at these in a little detail. I'm just going to go through them and we'll jump back and forth. This one I've tried to pronounce and go through a pronunciation a translator online. I think it's Mi'kmaq star. And this one looks like, for those of you who obviously cannot see this looks like a cross, but each branch of the cross is broken into 2 pieces. So really, it almost looks like a Maltese cross. And I didn't actually put the Maltese cross in here, so I probably should do that just right here. I'll add it to the slide. This is the Maltese cross. Okay, so those of you who cannot see this, it's basically 4 arrows pointing to a central point. And the bottom of the arrows are cut like a V. So there's 8 points. It's like a cross, four parts, but the 4 parts are broken into 2 each, so it's 8. So the Mi'kmaq, very similar to the Maltese cross, but the Maltese cross is not from the same part of the world that the Mi'kmaq is from. The Mi'kmaq, or Mi'kmaq, perhaps it's pronounced Mi'kmaq, are an indigenous group of people of the northeastern woodlands. So this is like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, parts of Canada, maybe part of the northeastern U.S. So that's a very far way from where the Maltese cross comes from. Even if you think about the Lakota people, I mean, it's the same continent, but it's still far away. It's not that it's like it's not like it's a mystery where these symbols come from. It's just the idea that no matter where you look in the world, whether you're in the Dakotas or you're in northeast U.S. up into Canada, even further north, you have the same symbols, and you have them between different tribes. And it's the same star. In fact, in the case of the Mi'kmaq and the Lakota stars, it's actually the same colors: red, yellow, white, and black. It's actually very German. And we could talk about what these symbols, like the colors themselves as symbols, what they represent. Don't think it's necessarily relevant, but we could certainly relate these to what? The 4 horses of the apocalypse, which we already discussed. So it's not really relevant to go back into the details of that. You'd have the white horse, you'd have the black horse, you'd have the red horse, and you'd have the pale horse. It's basically the 4 horses of the apocalypse. We already discussed that, so I won't spend any more time on it, but that's, I think, a simple interpretation of what those colors mean. There's more to it than that, but I think that's a simple interpretation. Black is fall, red is summer, yellow is the winter, and white is spring. There's the Maltese cross again, and then we're going to go to and this is one I've tried to also figure out how to pronounce properly. This is from the Mapuche tribe. It's called the Aruco, I believe is how you pronounce it. I could be wrong about that. Maybe I can look this up just to make sure I have take a second to get that translation. Mapuche tribe. Yeah, or Mapuche tribe. Also known as the Araucanians. They're indigenous to Chile. So if you go all the way down to Chile, you'll find the same exact star, except this star is white on a blue background, and it's the same as the Mi'kmaq star. It's just turned to the side. It kind of looks more like a star, actually. For those of you who can't see this, it's the same exact cross with each part of the cross, the horizontal vertical bars, the ends of them bent inward. So you get 2 points. So it's 8 total. And whereas the Lakota cross and the Mi'kmaq cross are red, yellow, black, and white, the cross of the Mapuche in Chile is white with a blue background. And then you have the Vagvasir. I put these into my little slideshow with numbers, so we're going to go in order here to keep it organized. The Vagvasir, I already showed you that, and it's cool because if you look at the Vagvasir, honestly, the first time that I had seen this many, many years ago when I was writing about it, I just like overlooked the obvious. If you look at it, you might think, oh, that's, it's runic, and we could try to decipher what this all means, but it's obviously the wheel of the year. But then in the middle is the wheel of the year. It's right there in the middle, 8 spokes. First time I saw that, I was like, well, that makes a lot more sense. It's right there in the middle. Most of you probably noticed that, but just being honest with how I see things, miss little obvious things like that sometimes. But there's the 8-spoked wheel, just like the wheel of the year, just like the Ingyoji amulet that I have, or talisman that I have. There's also another Norse symbol. This one is called the Star of Helm. And it almost has a feel that almost has an I Ching feel to it. A little bit. This symbol, for those of you who can't see it, is very similar to Vagvasir, except it has the 8-spoked wheel, and every spoke of the wheel comes out to an equal distance. And at the very tip of it, it has like I could just describe as like a crescent moon or a half circle. And then in between the wheel itself and the tip of where the spokes stretch out to, there are 3 lines which create, if you look at it as a whole, it basically creates another circle outside of the main 8-spoked wheel. Has a black sun feel to it a little bit, because the black sun, I think, has 12 points, not 8. There's also the Selbu, I believe is how you pronounce it, Selbu star. And this isn't necessarily how you say a talisman per se. This is more of like an art form. I think it largely comes from Norway. So it comes from that same part of the world. But this is it's like an artistic design. It's not necessarily like a symbol. I mean, it could represent that, if it's embroidered on something or it's sewn to something. It's more of just like an artistic design. Nevertheless, it has those points. And then we move on to this star. Now, this one took me a second to learn how to pronounce too. It's spelled KaheksaKand. I almost just want to try not to pronounce it, because I just get myself in trouble. People think because I can't pronounce some language I don't speak that I don't know what I'm talking about. I have a really hard time with pronouncing certain languages. This one I'll give it a try, Kaheksakan. And this is from Estonia. And for those of you who can't see it, it's the same exact type of star, except it is, it almost appears to be a game of tic-tac-toe with X's. If you look at it from that point of view, it's kind of cool to look at a symbol and then to like seeing the 8-pointed wheel inside the Vagvasir or the Star of Helm. And then if you look at this Kaheksakan star from Estonia, to me, it kind of looks like, a game of tic-tac-toe. So you've got your spaces, and then you've got your X's in those spaces. But it's the cool thing about geometry. It's really cool. So this is the star in Estonia. This is the Rub al-Hizb, which is Arabic. And that's your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pointed star with the circle in the middle. Same idea. Yes, and then the Dharma wheel, the Dharma chakra. It's the same thing as my little talisman from Ngoji, which, I mean, that it literally is the same thing. That's exactly what it is. That's probably, actually, I didn't think about this. That's probably why this has this talisman that I have. You can hear the gold circle with the 8 points. I'm guessing that's probably why it has the circle, or the little kind of crystal-looking reflective substance in the middle of the circle, because it probably represents the reflection of self. And the lotus flower that's in this Dharma chakra wheel that's on your screen, and for those who can't see it, it looks like a pirate ship wheel, and then it has a lotus flower in the middle, and that represents consciousness and enlightenment. So that's probably why there's like a clear little ball inside of mine, because you look into it and you see yourself. I think that's a lotus. Maybe it's not a lotus. I think it's a lotus. Then we have the Star of Lakshmi. I could be pronouncing that wrong as well. The Star of Lakshmi, this is a goddess that I was reading about relatively recently, because I did a Christmas show last year, Christmas presentation last year when I was in Tucson. And I started reading more about Lakshmi. It's a Hindu goddess of wealth, fortune, beauty, abundance, etc., etc. The wife of Vishnu, as a matter of fact. And Lakshmi is sometimes depicted with owls, and that would make her equivalent to, I want to be careful saying this for accuracy. It doesn't make her like Lilith, but it associates her with something similar. So Lilith, the Jewish temptress, the one that was in the garden before Eve, she is represented with owls or as being part owl. And I see this in the chat room too. I'll note what the chat says. Mystic Hydra says Athena. Exactly. So you have like Athena, or you have Minerva, Athena or Minerva, and they're goddesses of wisdom. And that's essentially what Lakshmi is. And we can find further evidence of that in the fact that if you look at a depiction of Lakshmi, I'll pull one up here so you can see it. She is usually standing holding lotus flowers or inside of a lotus flower, or she is sometimes represented with an owl. Maybe more commonly a white elephant, but often an owl. So really a beautiful depiction. I don't know. Indian art to me is a little bit too much. Kind of like Celtic art. It's a little bit too overwhelming. I'm more of a Zen guy. I'd like to just see a white piece of paper with a black streak. That's the aesthetic that pleases me. I mean, hey, I have it right behind me here in studio. You see my Enzo, the perfect circle. But even though it kind of is overwhelming to me, Indian art and Celtic art, it's still beautiful, and you can pull so much out from this. And you look at these headdresses. She's got the bindi dot. You look at the headdresses, and they're actually very similar in theme to what the Egyptians wore as well. And in a lot of ways too, it should be noted that so much of civilization comes out of India. And what doesn't really come out of India, civilization-wise, comes out of China. This whole Africa thing is just, I feel like it's going to be totally debunked in the next 20 to 30 years. It's nonsense. Not that there aren't, of course the Egyptians are there, but they're also like a starter culture, that came from something else. Anyway, there's Lakshmi, and this is her star. It is an 8-sided star as well. This particular star, I actually found this right before the show, so I labeled it. It's like I had these labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. How many do we have? We have 16. So I labeled this 10.5 to stick it in the middle. This is called the Latvian star, or the Latvian Osculus. Osculus. I think it's Osculus. And this is identical to all the other stars we've seen. The Mi'kmaq specifically, it's literally the same exact star. Literally the same exact star, except this is Latvian, this star. It's crossed with those 8 points for those who can't see. And the Mi'kmaq, these are two very, very distant, separated parts of the world. And they use literally the exact same symbol. So, I mean, you can say, well, Latvia is like what, Northern Europe, and Europeans came over here. Well, it doesn't matter what the explanation is. The point is everybody uses the same symbol because it has the same meaning, and it's a universal meaning, and it's protective, and it's guiding. This is the will of Christ. You have the Greek here for Jesus Christ, God's Son, or God's Son Savior, or I think it translates to Jesus Christ, the Son of God. But this is your 8-spoked wheel. Another one I didn't actually throw in here is the wheel of the chariot of Krishna, Christ. And I think, let's see, maybe that one's easy to find. Maybe it's not. You have to find the one that's actually on the temple. I think I found it here. Yeah, this is the one that's actually on a temple. Konark Sun Temple. I wonder if that's safe. I guess I have to download it directly. Tried to drag and drop it. That didn't work. Okay. Konark Sun Temple. This is the wheel of Krishna's chariot. Now, some depictions, if you type it in, will show that the wheel has multiple spokes beyond the 8. But what's actually on the temple is this. So this is the 8-spoked wheel of Krishna at the Sun Temple. I wonder why it would be at the Sun Temple. Probably because that's the sun in the middle, and these are the equinoxes, solstices, and the midpoints between them, where we are approximately right here on Halloween, unless you invert it. Some people invert it, so the winter solstice is at the bottom, the summer's at the top. Either way, though, right here is the Halloween. So that is the Sun Temple, and that is Krishna. So Krishna, the Christ, the Sun Temple, and the 8-spoked wheel, which is vastly more ancient than anything out of Christendom, anything out of Judaism, and anything out of Druidism, was just replicated by the Greek Christians and turned into the IXOYE, or the Jesus Christ, God's Son Savior wheel, which was a talisman, or more so it was like a secret sign the Christians used to communicate with one another. It was a Freemasonic sign, basically. Another irony, because Christians and conservatives are really, really, really freaked out about masonry. I got to be careful, even if I scratch my chest or something, because I have an itch here with my shirt. If I scratch my chest on air, oh my goodness, my finger went through the buttons, and that must mean I'm a Mason. It's really stupid. So a lot of Christians will think, Masons meet in secret and they're evil. Really? Because the Christians met in secret, and they used little hand gestures and little symbols because they didn't want to be killed. So it's the same exact thing. It's actually the reason that the Romans came after the Druids, was because they were meeting in secret. It's the same reason they came after the Christians, and the same reason they came after the Jews. Otherwise, Rome was pretty tolerant. Otherwise, it depends on the time period, but Rome was relatively tolerant. Let me jump to the chat real fast. Someone said, Reno Max said, hopefully Ryan will do a show on Phoenician Canaanite. Do you mean like the cultures? Do you mean the myths, or do you mean the symbolism, or what do you mean exactly? I mean, we've talked about Phoenicia. I think that's the origin of phonetics for language too, and they were very, very skilled maritime society. very good at navigating the oceans. See, Flux brings that up as well. Patriot Girl says, I think Jesus studied in Egypt. Yes, that's how the story goes, except the Jews accused him of covering himself in Egyptian tattoos and magic. Probably means that he went there. It's just they kind of mocked the idea of it, because to the Pharisees, that was blasphemous. Even though, where Egypt was coming from thousands of years before Christ, was God knows how many thousands or tens of thousands of years older than that, and that's way older than the Jews. It's so weird. We have this debate about, or these arguments about, like, yeah, Africa's the hub of civilization, and nothing really came out of India or China. And even though Japan has the oldest pottery, and I've even read the oldest leather in the world, there's nothing significant to find there, and there's nothing interesting about that. And it's really just Western civilization that saved the world. And even though Eastern civilization is across the board more intellectual, more clean, more respectful, things that supposedly are the cornerstone of Christianity. And also we have these silly arguments and these silly debates about, like, these little minor discrepancies in age. Well, that symbol's 200 years old, and that means Christ still came first. Yeah, but what about the Star of Inanna? That's 4,000 plus BC. But really, when you look at where this stuff is coming from, it's just like the core of human civilization, wherever it existed in the world, the core of human nature, wherever it existed in the world, wherever humans were aware of their surroundings, that's where this stuff all comes from. It's not like one wins, one's better than the other. It's so strange, so bizarre that we argue about this kind of stuff. It really shouldn't matter at all. Anyway, if you have a response, I'm curious, did you want me to do a show on the symbols themselves, or the mythology, or what? And maybe I can figure something out. I actually have a book on Phoenician magic, Canaanite magic, so we could maybe talk about that. I can look into that for another show. But I mean, the pretty sure the Phoenicians, they worshipped Ishtar Inanna too, or one version of her. So it's the Inanna star, which is what's next, the Star of Ishtar, or the Star of Inanna. This is my ace card. So, the Vagmasphere is only 200 years old. Christ came first. Really? Well, here's the Ishtar star, 4,000 plus BC. So you lose. And I don't want to make it a contest, but when people want to make it a contest, we'll make it a contest. You're going to lose every time as a Christian, because there was a world before Christ, and that world before Christ had a Krishna, the Christ, and it had an 8-spoked wheel that the Greek Christians just adopted as the sun wheel, and they turned it into this. For those of you who can't see, they turned it into the Greek will of Christ. And that's exactly what the will of Krishna is. And here's Inanna's star. And here are some examples. Here's an Assyrian relief of the star. This is a very, very famous relief. Very, very famous. And you can see the 8-pointed star in the middle. This is one of the ones where they use on Ancient Aliens. See, here's a giant, and here's little people, and the giant is in control of everything. And this means there were giants and they were aliens, and this is their flying saucer, that kind of thing, which apparently makes money, I guess. I don't know. We could talk about all of that stuff, but what's really relevant to us here now is the 8-pointed star. So it's not just, an artist's rendering or some computer-generated version of it. This is the actual relief, a photograph of the actual relief of that star. And it appears to be being held up in the heavens, which to me just kind of indicates that what we're looking at here, without knowing any of the language, we're looking at the star. This is the Star of Ishtar Inanna, and we're looking at some celestial being holding it up on the table that is the physical world, or holding it above the physical world. So here's the 3-dimensional world. Here's the heavens, or the star in the heavens above, and here's the gods holding the star up, and then this is the world here. and then behind that veil is probably God. It's probably something to do with that. I don't know. It's just a very brief interpretation. And then this is from the British Museum, so you can actually see it directly. It has cuneiform script below it. This is the actual a scan of the actual relief, and you can read here. And what does it say? The Sun God tablet. So it's the Sun God. Limestone tablet. The scene sculptured in relief at the head of the tablet represents Nabu Aplu Idina being led by the priest Nabu Nadin Shum and the goddess Ah into the presence of the sun god, who is seated within Ebabara. Before the god is the solar disk resting upon the altar, which is supported by ropes held by attendant deities. That's how they describe it in the British Museum. I guess I didn't read that until now, but I guess I wasn't too far off, because it's just the same exact thing over and over again. You don't really need to be that well educated to recognize what we're looking at here. So in this particular case, this disc, according to the museum, it represents the sun, which in the center of it does, but it's also known as the Star of Inanna. And this is a really interesting myth. The star, what it represents, the Star of Inanna, the Star of Ishtar, represents or preserves two very, very interesting myths. You have the ascent of Ishtar, and you have the descent of Inanna. And whether you are ascending or descending, ascending into the heavens above or descending into the hell below, you go through these 8 spheres. So if you are going through the heaven above, you are going through the classical planets, the 8 spheres, depending on what part of the world you're looking at. The sun, the moon could also be considered planets, in Sumeria famously. And when you look at the downside of that, or the underworld side of that, you go through the different rings or levels of hell. And the Star of Inanna and the Star of Ishtar, representing the sun, is a guiding force, like the guiding star that brought people to the birth of Christ. Again, we are talking about the same exact thing here. So Inanna's descent and Ishtar's ascent tell the same story. And what they're basically telling, as Ishtar goes into heaven and she has her garments removed, she has the cloak of the body, the bracelets, the girdle, the ornaments of the breast, the necklace, the earrings, the crown of the head, all removed from her when she goes into the sky and goes and communes with the planets, and they strip her of these things. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have Inanna, who goes into the underworld, and she's also stripped of these ornaments. And so what you're looking at here, I think, is very, very, very clear to be a shamanic process, to be a ritualistic death and rebirth process. They're talking about the underworld and the river of souls. They're talking about being dismembered, being taken apart. Some of you might also, think probably. I mean, I thought this when I first read the story many, 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 many years ago, that the garments of Ishtar are very similar to the armor of Christ. The armor of Christ. You got the truth sword, and you got the breastplate of, I don't know, the breastplate of whatever, I forget the names of it. You got the boots, you got the hat, you got all the pieces you need to defend yourself against evil. And hey, if you grew up in the time period I grew up in, Bible Man even had a lightsaber to fight evil. He was like a bat Jedi. It's like a Batman, Bible Man Jedi. So those are obviously metaphors, and the ornaments are the different parts of the body that correspond to the different planets or correspond to the different astrological signs. And they're probably the same whether you're going up or you're going down, and no matter where you go in the world, because it doesn't really matter how you die or how you have a near-death experience. You're probably going to go through the exact same transitional process. So if you're a tribe in the Amazon, even without ayahuasca, or if you're living a life up in Northern Europe, or you're living a life on some island in the Pacific, you have a near-death experience, you're going to experience something very similar. And then when you factor in the ayahuasca or the poppy or the peyote or the blue water lily in Egypt or soma in India or ergot in Greece, and the list goes on and on and on. If you ever watched Dune or you read Dune, the water of life is a blue liquid water, and that's the blue water lily of Egypt. And I've never been to an Egyptian museum until I went to a display in Hiroshima a few weeks ago. I did a show on that. And my God, the blue water lily was on like everything. They were totally obsessed with the blue water lily. And I'm looking around looking for some kind of like, I don't know, a description of why that is. And there's nothing. It's like, how can one of the world's leading museum pieces or museum sets, which is from the New York Museum, have no, like, I mean, there's like a reference, like they like blue water lily, and they don't, there's no explanation. I don't need to be an Egyptologist to know why they revered the blue water lily. It's just strange, like something so obvious. There's like virtually no mention of it in one of the leading museums on Egyptian artifacts. It's so weird. It's so strange. But the blue water lily in Egypt is famous. That's where you get the idea in Dune. It doesn't matter where you look in the world, whether you have a near-death experience, you're in the Amazon, you're on some island of the Pacific, you're up in Northern Europe, doesn't matter where you are, you're going to experience some part or some version of the afterlife. And so that's probably one of the main reasons why these stories are so similar. And that's why the story of Ishtar's ascent and the story of Inanna's descent are talking about the removal of parts of the body. And in these particular stories, you don't have temptation or necessarily I mean, Inanna, there are some trials, but even having the body dismembered, that in and of itself is a trial. So you go through these trials and then you are resurrected, which Christianity used to teach that until it was purged. But that reincarnation process is also perhaps not literal. It's a reincarnation in the sense that your soul goes back into the infinite, and then the infinite produces more individualized souls. So you're just like a part of something larger. It's another one of those things where it's not a single line. Like reincarnation would take vast amounts of scholarly texts and historical texts to understand what it actually is. It isn't just oh no, someone came back as a lizard, someone came back as a rat. I don't think that's how it works. So anyway, Inanna's descent, Ishtar's ascent, these are basically shamanic journeys, and they mirror as well the movement and the path of the sun, which is what we see here on this Assyrian relief, where you have a sun god who's obviously in the sky, and you have the other deities holding up the sun or holding up the star above the table that represents, I mean, if you're a tarot reader, the table represents the four corners of the material world. So that's the four horses of the apocalypse. And of course, the sun god and the creator sits on the square, the cube. So that's equates the sun god almost with Saturn as well. And this is the guiding light. The star is the guiding light. It's the guiding light in the underworld. It's the guiding light to bring the wise men to Christ's birth. It's the guiding light to bring all of us to salvation. It's the guiding light to bring us and help us to the underworld. In essence, this particular star, this Ishtar star, this Inanna star, is actually the Eye of Horus. It's the guide for the underworld. And I know that you know what the Eye of Horus looks like. And you probably know the Eye of Horus also corresponds to the human brain. But even though you know that, I'm going to put it up on the screen anyway, because it represents pretty much the same exact thing. It's the Eye of Horus. That's basically what you're looking at there. And the eye anyway, the particular eye of Horus, there's a right eye and there's a left eye. One corresponds to the right-hand path, one corresponds to the left-hand path, one corresponds to the sun, and one corresponds to the moon. And this, again, is a universal idea. Probably most famous in Egypt, but if you read classical Greek mythology, there's a lot of that in Greek mythology as well. And then we go further east. And as we go further east, we find not so much a star, but we find these characters. Some of you may know who these characters are. Some of you may not. For those of you who cannot see the show tonight, you can only hear it, which is the majority. What is on the screen right now is a very famous painting. There are lots of them, as a matter of fact, but this is a very famous painting of the 8 immortals of China. Now, I know that if you bring this up to some religious people and you point out that the 8 immortals of China are representatives of the 8-spoked will of Christ, they'll get very upset with you. China is far more ancient by 5, 6, I don't know how many thousands of years older than Christ, but the 8 immortals doesn't disprove, quote, Christ. It just means that the stories are very old, but the 8 immortals that are described in Chinese mythology are not only legendary and a cornerstone myth from China, but their job, the job of the immortals, is to do precisely what Christ does. Be offended all you want, but the fact is the 8 immortals out of China bestow life and destroy evil. They bestow life and they destroy evil, which is precisely what ISIS did in Egypt. ISIS destroyed evil and she gave life. Her symbol, the knot of Isis, or the Ankh, represents the ovaries. It's that tree that Ophelia crawls through in Pan's Labyrinth. And the baptismal waters of the Nile, the urine, the sweat, the vaginal lubrication, the tears, the saliva, all the liquid of Isis. Not an actual literal person, but all of the moisture of the goddess, which would, if the goddess is the earth, and we're talking about the rivers, we're talking about the ocean, we're talking about all of that. Remember in Dune how water is really important on Arrakis, and they have the big preserve of water, and they extract it from the bodies when people die? Similar idea. And this water is baptismal. The Nile River was baptismal. They used to baptize the pharaohs 4,000 years ago, which is based on an even older concept. So you take these liquids and you baptize, you purify, you give life, and you destroy evil. And that's exactly what ISIS, if you read some of the Egyptian magical spells, or I think there's Greek ones as well, what you'll read about people being burned by the sun, or being burned by evil, or being harmed by evil. And then you heal them with the protective oils and liquids of Isis. I mean, it's like putting a cross on the head with oil. It's like going through a baptism in church. It's the exact same thing, or it has the exact same purpose. Might be a slightly different way of doing it, but it has the exact same purpose. And that's what these 8 immortals do. They ride a boat. They bring peace and life, and they also destroy evil. So this is a universal concept. Here is another one. This is called the Bagwo star. And you can see, and I love this particular image, because this image is identical in theme and in concept. Slightly different representation, but it's identical to the European Will of the Year, which is not European, but I think famously it's European Will of the Year, because the Will of the Year you see has, the different holy days, it has the Sabbats, it has the midpoints, the solstices, equinoxes. And if you translate that into nature speak, if you will, well, what do? You get heaven, wind, water, mountains, earth. You get thunder, fire, and lakes. And you get the duality in the center. And you find something also similar to that in the Will of the Year. This particular one that I have doesn't have this, but a lot of Wills of the Year will have in the center, they will have maybe the sun and the moon, so the duality of light and dark, or they will have a pentagram. And a pentagram represents the 4 elements, and the 5th, which is consciousness. But if you invert it, you get darkness. So you have light and dark embodied in the pentagram as well, or the there's other names for it, but the pentagram is probably the most famous. And that's in the middle. We find that in the east as well, Bagua star. For those of you who can't see this, Type in BAGUA star, and you will see the Bagua star. And then you have this, which is not, it's not a star. But if you look at this image, I think this is probably the most famous version of it. It's called the Ashtamangala. The Ashtamangala, I think there are, I guess you'd call them almost like a Celtic knot. It's called the Endless Knot. It's in Tibet. Srivatsa, I believe is how you pronounce it. And it has some relationship to this, although if you look at the knot, it doesn't look like it has 8 points. So that's why I didn't share it. But the concept of the Ashtamangala, I think in Sanskrit, it's probably pronounced a lot different than I'm pronouncing it, but the Ashtamangala is the sacred set of 8 auspicious signs. And it comes from Chinese, and you find this in India, you find it in Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, etc. But these symbols or these symbolic attributes are teaching tools. And these attributes point to qualities of enlightenment. These 8 attributes are related to those 8 points on the solar and the natural wheel of the year. Now, this isn't a star. These are concepts that represent different parts of the body. So here's the head, here's the heart. Sounds very similar to the star and the story of Ishtar and Inanna and the different parts of her body that are dismembered and taken apart, like in the shamanic journey. And one of them you can see on your screen here is the feet, which is the wheel of the year. There's the 8-pointed star down there. For those of you who can't see this, you type it in Ash, ASHTAM, Tam, AN, on Gala, GALA, ASHTAMANGALA, and you'll be able to pull this up pretty easily. There's a lot of various depictions of this around the world. There's like, they carve it into doors on temples. There's paintings, there's embroiderings of it, et cetera, et cetera. And in this particular case, you have a separate, like story behind each one of these symbols. And this 8-pointed star here, try to pronounce it again in Sanskrit. It's very difficult, but it's basically the Dharma chakra that we talked about earlier. And the Dharma chakra comes from these 8 different things, which means that the wheel of the year doesn't just relate to the turning of the wheel of the year, like the sun and the seasons. It also relates to the aspects of self. It also relates to the different parts of the body. It also relates to the transformation of self spiritually. So you get a physical, you get a spiritual, and you get an internal as well as an external physical and spiritual representation of the underlying currents which animate the world. In other words, to put things simply and not make it super complex, these 8 points represent the various different spiritual forces that drive us forward. I think of it like Pan leading Ophelia through the labyrinth in the movie Pan's Labyrinth. He's not evil. He's actually there to help. And you have to go through trials, and you have to go through tribulations, and you have to go through the dead and the resurrection of the dead. And you have to lift the veil, and you have to go to the other side. You have to face the pale man. You have to face death. And if you can go through all of this, and you know the codes, you know the passwords, you know the secret hand signs and the secret symbols, and you know what you're supposed to do and when you're supposed to do it, Tibetan Book of the Dead, Egyptian Book of the Dead, etc., then you can transcend. You can move on. You become a star by going through the Orion hand, and you go through the path of souls through the Milky Way, and you are perhaps reincarnated. You are purified of your sins. And the same thing happens when you go through from Ishtar up. I almost said Ashtar command. The Ishtar star above, or the Inanna levels of hell below. Once you proceed through all of that, you are purified and you are resurrected. And this is what the shaman does. This is what Ishtar and Inanna did. And this is what is happening every year as the wheel turns. And I just I just went to Ngoji Temple and I found this little talisman. And this is how my mind works because I don't do anything else except this show and watch hockey. And I just saw this and I just 2 hours in my head coming down the mountain and coming back to Tokyo. This is in my head. I was like, well, there's so many different correlations to this, so many different correlations. Let's find as many as we can. And so I've tried to do my best on that tonight to show you what this all means, to remind you that this 8-pointed wheel, this 8-spoke wheel, is not just about the turning of the sun or the turning of the wheel of nature. It's not just about the apocalypse, the Armageddon story, the lifting of the veil, the battle between good and evil, light and dark, Zoroastrianism. It's not just that. It's also about the 8 parts of the body, the 8 different spheres, or the 8th sphere, the 7 emanations from the 8th sphere, which creates a cube. It's also about understanding the spiritual nature, not just of nature itself, but the spirits that we call fairies, goblins, leprechauns, demons, etc., yokai in Japan, etc. But the spirits that's inside of us, the soul, the true us, go through that death process. We were resurrected. It's the same story. It's as old as time. It's told universally around the world. And we go to the chat very quickly here because Joe Ryder asked a good question. Joe Ryder said, Ryan, in your personal opinion, why did these people keep this from us? I know the question you're asking. I'm not being sarcastic when I say that in order to answer that, we'd have to say, well, what people are we talking about? And keep this. What is this? Keep this from us. Keep what from us? I don't think anybody's really kept it from you. I mean, institutions have certainly taken a literal interpretation of a lot of stuff and perverted it. I've been kind of making a joke about it this week, but it's also true that Christianity and I say probably Islam to some extent too, but definitely Christianity just tore down the oak groves of trees and crosses and then just repurposed them into boards to make churches. And then they worship at the altar of a wooden cross. The same thing the Druids did. So it's not that it's kept. It's like in Druidism and in the Celtic parts of the world, especially in Scotland and Ireland, what was happening is that people would, when Christianity began to spread, they just said, well, your crosses are evil, our crosses are good. Your nature is evil, our nature is good. This is literally what happened. In fact, the Christians in Ireland would have to exorcise places where Druids would have meetings because the Druid crosses and the Druid exorcisms against evil and wickedness were not good enough for the Christians. So they had to exorcise the Druids and the presence of the Druids. But we're all doing the same exact thing, and you're using the same symbols and the same incantations and the same exorcisms, and you believe in the same omnipotent God and the same all-powerful God and the same Madonna and child and the same resurrection, the same eternal nature of the soul. You believe in the same exact thing. You're talking about the same exact thing, but of course, one cult is better. And that's not an exclusive thing to Christianity. They get the bad rep for that, but it's every conquering culture that does that. It's a natural byproduct of the evolution of I guess human civilization. Replace one culture with your culture, even if it's the same. You just change the names, etc. But you can still see that there's a basis for all this, just in human nature itself. You don't have to have a lost civilization, although that might contribute to some of it. You don't have to have aliens. This is just all part of this is what we see. This is how we interact with the world. So it's not that it's been hidden from us. It's that it is hidden in nature below the surface. And if we choose to see it, then we find all of this magic. And if we choose to ignore it, or we just don't look for it or look further than what's on the surface, then we don't see it. So I think it's like a mixture of, yeah, there's definitely institutional suppression, but most of it is just because we're not looking for it. We're not looking for the correlations, and we're not looking for the meanings and the purposes behind it. I think that's part of it. I'm sure it's a lot more complex than that, but that's just my answer in the short time we have left. And yes, Joe Ryder says, I would say it would be to keep us divided. Well, that's part of it. I mean, that's why they never tell you that the Muslims believe that Jesus is their savior and coming back to save them with the Mahdi. But, he is. Jesus is coming back to save the Muslims. Muhammad isn't coming back. They believe that Jesus is coming back, but they don't want to tell you that because that would unite people together. And by they, I mean, I would say the largely Jewish-run media, the Ellison media now. They don't want you to believe that or think that. Islam's the enemy. Go to war with Islam. Let's have a war. Let's unite all the religions under one global religious order, or let's just destroy them all and replace them. That's what is happening now. And if you understand, I think the symbolic nature of what the apocalypse and Armageddon are, going back to the beginning of the show, you don't really need to be scared of the eschaton or Armageddon or the final war, or having your head cut off in the tribulation, because all that stuff, you've survived that hundreds of times, thousands of times, millions of times throughout all of human history. Also, by the way, really quick, because we're talking about this, Nate is in the chat, and Nate said Pope's got its prayer rug at the Vatican now for the Muslim brothers. Yeah, I saw that, and I saw Laura Loomer say, this proves the Pope is a Marxist. It's like, well, hold on a second. Jews created Marxism, and they're using Islam as a sword to destroy whatever's left, to quote, Western civilization. And if anybody's still trusting the Vatican to do the right thing, or to do, I don't know, anything good, that's a bigger problem than a Muslim praying room at the Vatican. It's a much bigger problem. If you think you can trust the Vatican, oh, they have a Muslim praying room. How about all those kids that they raped? How about all that human drug and all kinds of other forms of trafficking? How about all the support for the wars? How about, I mean, that's the issue, is they've got a Muslim prayer room. Yeah, and the UN also has a room where you can go channel spirits and aliens. So I'm not really surprised, and I'm also not really concerned about it, because I think that it's all scripted, and I think that if you learn about what the will of the year actually is, it's a lot more comforting than all this religious stuff that we're talking about. But that's just me. That's how I choose to see it. I think it's a little bit more peaceful. Anyway, tstradio.info is the website. rdgable@yahoo.com is the email. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Please buy me a coffee/book. The links are below. However you're listening, please make sure that you subscribe to the show. And if you're listening in the free archive and you hear ads, you want to get rid of them, subscribe. But if you don't mind the ads, they support us. That's our primary source of income. Thank you so much for listening in those ways, because you have to listen to 2 to 3 ads every 10 minutes. But hey, it supports the show, and some people do that. They just play it in the background to help us out. That really does help the show out. So I appreciate that. I thank you so much for that. You keep us on air Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and you allow us to do these shows. If you enjoyed tonight's show, you will definitely enjoy my book, Occult Arcana. You can get a copy on the website, tstradio.info. And that's the show, The Wheel of the Octagram. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Thanks for listening. Patriot Girl, Huey, Deborah, Flux, Joe, Leonard, Evan Kelly, Mystic Hydra, Nate, Night Watch in the chat, just joined us a few minutes ago. I know I've missed a lot of chat comments, but this is more of a presentation. When we do longer shows, we do a lot more commentary from the chat, and we also have a pre-show as well. Only 2 hours tonight. Hope they have a great weekend. I'm going to enjoy my weekend. I'm going to go watch some hockey and take my mind off of, I'll try to take my mind off of some of the rest of this. I see Zach in the chat. Zach, thank you for joining us, as well as we have a huge list of people here that I have on my end. Kay Owens, Reno Mac, most people I mentioned earlier, Shaking the Hidden Hand, etc. If I didn't mention your name, I apologize. You either didn't say something in the chat or I missed it. But we will be back next Friday. We'll have Mike D, and we'll be talking about the Dog Man. Our Halloween series will also continue next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, stay safe, stay informed, stay healthy, and I will talk to you on the next broadcast.
Thank you.